Driving laws come into force today with new limits on illegal and, in fact, some prescription drugs. But the new law is already controversial. Greater Manchester Police says it won't, for the moment, be testing for new limits because its equipment isn't ready. But GMP will use their drug analyzers when they're confident that the officers are fully trained and that the roadside testing kits are ready. Now, there are some fears that drivers using prescription drugs will also face prosecution, but Department of Transport advisor Professor David Taylor doesn't think that this will be a problem.
The onus is on the individual to assure themselves that their driving ability is not impaired. What is different is that there are prescribed limits, and these are rather high limits. They allow for normal dosing. Even if you are above that limit, as long as you are prescribed the medication, you're taking it as prescribed, and your driving ability is not impaired, then you won't be prosecuted. You'll have what's called a medical defence.
Now a national law firm says the justice system is unprepared to deal with the new law as well. Alison Ashworth is the head of Motoring Law at Forster Dean Solicitors in Rochdale and joins me now. Alison, what's your response then to this new law? Is it wrong, or is it just right now is not a good time?
I think that in principle, of course, it's a good idea to clamp down on drug driving. Statistically, it's one of the offences that the police simply don't focus on whenever there's been an accident, like they do in the same way with drink driving. That's given far more attention. However, I don't necessarily think that now is the right time. I think that there's a lot of issues which still require attention and need to be ironed out before this law goes live. It has gone live today, despite lots of issues still being in place, and unfortunately, in my opinion, that is going to lead to a significant number of cases being brought before the court despite serious procedural errors taking place, and may lead to a number of appeals and in the first instance, of course, acquittals.
So what are your main issues? I mean, Greater Manchester Police are saying, look, the officers aren't ready and the equipment's not ready so far, so we're not going to do anything just yet. Aside from the officer training and the actual equipment itself, is there anything else that you feel needs to be ironed out?
Well, there's a few things, yes. I mean, I've received a number of inquiries from members of the public who simply aren't sure what these limits actually mean themselves. There's lots of people who take prescription medication and they're concerned, and of course I advise them that if they're taking the medication in accordance with prescribing instructions, then they should be fine. But then there's also this grey area. If somebody is taking, for example, morphine, which is opiate based, and then if they were to take over-the-counter cocodamol, for example, and then they had to take that in accordance with the instructions in the leaflet, there's this grey area over whether the medical defence would be available to them then, because they have done everything they're supposed to do, but there's this double line of input that they're getting in terms of the dosage that they should be taking. In my opinion, the medical defence certainly would be available to them. But I think that the other issue with the medical defence, of course, is that the prosecution are going to find it extremely difficult to navigate their way around it. How could they possibly disprove that somebody had taken their medication in accordance with the instructions of their GP when everybody's body metabolises at a different rate and eliminates drugs at a different rate? It's going to be very difficult for the prosecution to disprove this, and so there's going to be a lot of cases coming before the court. They'll be relying on this legislation because it's much easier than the Section 4 offence of driving whilst unfit, because they don't need to prove any impairment, but I suspect there'll be lots and lots of acquittals on the basis that it's practically impossible for the prosecution to disprove this medical defence.
But it seems as well the onus is very much on the defendant's own analysis of their ability to drive. As we heard there in the clip from the Department of Transport advisor, he was saying, well, you know, it's up to somebody to decide whether or not they feel they are able to drive. I know if I have a small codeine tablet, not even up to the amount my body can officially take, I can't even get out of a chair. As you said, different bodies metabolise in different ways, and I personally know I am absolutely intolerant to that specific prescription medication. However, legally, I can take it and drive, but I know personally that I can't. Now, somebody else might take it and be in a legal limit and think, I'm fine, and then drive erratically.
Yeah, that's the issue. I mean, the old offence of driving whilst unfit is still in place, so if you took a codeine pill and you were affected in a negative manner, then you would still be prosecuted and face a 12-month ban over the original offence. But I don't necessarily think that it's fair that somebody who is driving within their personal tolerances, and if they might be over the limit, but if their driving's not impaired, I don't necessarily agree that it's fair when somebody hasn't got that same level of culpability, when they didn't know that their driving was impaired. And you've got to remember as well, these two groups of offenders are sentenced in the same way. But with the new offence, sentencing guidelines haven't yet been drafted, and they're not ready to be drafted until, say, 2016. I was speaking to the Sentencing Council about this. And therefore, there's going to be no guidance in place to sentence anybody who has, say, twice the legal limit of one of these substances in their system more harshly than somebody who's marginally over. I think we're going to see a great deal of injustice throughout the country, with people being sentenced on the basis of one particular judge or bench of magistrates' opinion when it may be completely different to another's.
Okay, Alison, thank you very much. That's Alison